When he was at IEM Cologne in Germany, Doublelift did an interview with ESL in which he made kind of somewhat of a provocative statement where I actually transcribed it. He said, I bet you there's a faker in every region. It's just that Korea is the best at finding the faker and turning him into a god. And then later in the interview, he said, Korea just has this infrastructure and good coaching to make a random challenger level player into a superstar. Now, what's interesting about that statement is, first of all, I've made this point actually in previous videos about Doublelift. Every now and then he will make a really shrewd point, actually. He has like kind of a lucid moment where he'll say something that like maybe you haven't thought of it that way before, or it's just quite poignant for the moment. But also, he's also someone who, in general, is kind of, I don't know that he entirely thinks things through before he says them. He just kind of says them, and if it seems like that's about right, then yeah, he just goes with that. Like, yep, that's what I think. And he's kind of a bit set in his ideas like that. So what's interesting about that statement is I think a lot of people kind of maybe thought it had something value to it, or they thought, maybe he's right, actually. It was good food for thought, actually. Maybe that is the case. Maybe there are all these fakers in the region. Maybe Korea's infrastructure is what makes it really great. But actually, as you might have guessed, I don't agree with that statement at all, actually. In fact, that sees the world from a totally different perspective from the one I see when I look at the League of Legends world. And so, first and foremost, before I go into the issue of like whether there are fakers and whether Korea is the best at making them into the faker, first of all, let me just say that using the term faker there, not just to be the player faker, but like the fakers, like there are all these fakers out there, that in itself I find, from my perspective on the game, very problematic because, first and foremost, if you were describing to someone who came from outside of League of Legends, like, and they were like, who is Faker? It wouldn't be enough to just say to them, oh, Faker's the best player ever. Like, even just saying that might still give them the notion that, like, oh, right, so of League of Legends players, there's like, say, like the 10 best players, and then there's like Faker, but then right next to him or in competition with him is like number 2, and then number 3 is quite close, and number 4, number 5. It really is the case that Faker is such a transcendent talent and in so incredibly widespread in the areas that he's like a 10 out of 10 in terms of like intelligence, decision-making, skill, matchups, composure under pressure. He really is like a 10 out of 10 in so many different areas that he's more than just the best player. As in, if Faker didn't exist, the next guy up who'd become the best player, whoever that might be, like, I don't know, Dade or Wei Zhao, one of these sorts of like these sorts of players who could be in that role, they aren't 10s in all these areas. Like, they might be a 10 in one area, or they might be 9 in a bunch, or they might have like 10 in this area, but like 7 in this one. But the team that they play in makes them be able to be the best. The difference is, Faker really is that much above and beyond the others that you have to emphasize that and really articulate that this guy is special, not even just for a League of Legends player, for like any player ever in esports. That's the sort of talent and ability that we're talking about, like a really unique, once in a generation, once in a lifetime type player, comparable with the true gods of some of those other games where they really were just the best ever. So in saying that, the reason why I set that out is because, first of all, from my perspective, there really aren't other fakers in other regions. It's not just that Korea has all these best players and that's why they got a faker. Korea very well could have had all the great players they've had, or all the great teams they've had, and never had a faker come along. Same as other regions have never really had a faker like that. China's never had a faker. Europe's never had a faker. North America's never had a faker. They've had extremely good players, very good players who can compete with the best players from Korea. The difference is the best players from Korea have to be separated away from faker. Faker is just a level above. And so I'll probably do some work about that in the future, explaining why he's different to even other great Korean players. But the reason why I state that is because, okay, for the rest of this video, just to go along with the premise of Doublelift's concept, I'll use the term faker as if it means like just the best player possible in League of Legends terms. And so we're not talking about faker as in like a guy above and beyond, like a super genius type guy, but we're talking about, okay, players who could be from another region that isn't Korea, but in terms of skill and potential, etc., they could be what the best Korean player is who isn't Faker. So imagine Faker, who, by the way, is the greatest outlier in League of Legends history. Just take him out of the equation for the moment. Even though we're going to use the Faker to just mean the best players from Korea, we don't really mean Faker, okay? But just for the sake of having a term, we'll use the Faker in his version now of the Faker in every region, and Korea turns the Faker into the best. So the first and foremost reason why I don't think this is the case is because, like his second part of his comment implied there, to him, it's almost like there's this breeding ground of like talents, like a lot of talents in, say, solo queue, amateur scene, practice partners. And what happens is this coaching system, the team houses, the head coaches who set the practice, the positional coaches who maybe come in or having other good players to play against, and then having coaches for strategy. These factors are what take the good player and they develop him and he blossoms into a Faker. First of all, just to touch on Faker, that's not what happened with Faker. Faker was this god of solo queue who came in and he was instantly amazing. He never had a development process. He never had a period where like he was really bad at this area and he had a very limited champion pool. Faker was really, really one of the best players ever in his first season, within the first few games of playing. He really is an outlier in that sense. So first of all, that's why you can't use the Faker in that sense. But okay, even the other players in general, it wasn't the case with. Like people like Shy and Flame and these sorts of guys who came in from solo queue, obviously Mata. A lot of these guys, even their development period was very much an individualistic thing, or in terms of being put in the right role in the team. Their actual skills, they didn't come in. It's not like, okay, Shy came in and he was like on the level of, who have we got now? Someone like a Marin or a Duke, formerly Leopard. He wasn't like good and talented and we knew he could be something, but he's fallen and he's failing in all these ways and like, the coach has to like develop him and work with him and all this sort of thing. No, these guys became gods within like, at most a season. Like they played a season and then next season they were a god. They were the best they could possibly be. These players are incredible players who just needed the opportunity to become gods. That's my general point I'm going to get to in this video. I don't think the infrastructure makes the Fakers, makes the gods. I think the gods come up anyway and will develop that way. And as long as you allow them the opportunity to get to the top and get into good teams, they will be gods. And even if they're in low teams, they could be gods as well. But the key thing to me that Korean infrastructure does is not take the good player and make him into a superstar. It takes the decent player and makes him into, in theory, one of the best at his position, but not a star player. It just makes him into the best in terms of like the best complementary player he could be. And then they put those sorts of players around the Faker, the god. We'll just use the Faker as the god in this. They take the complementary players and they put the right complementary players around the Faker, depending on what the Faker's strengths and skills are in a particular way, to make him look like the Faker. Because to a normal godlike player, it's true, sometimes they'll look like a level of a Faker player. But the difference is Faker can do it even when all his team's doing badly. We saw this in the last season here. He can still do incredible things no matter what teammates almost he has, no matter what composition he has, he can still be Faker. The difference is his team won't win and he won't be able to have the impact and dominate the whole game unless he has the right complementary pieces around him. And so to me, that's what Korea's the best at, doing that. And crucially, as a counterpoint, in the West, I think we don't get a Faker, but we get the Fakers in the terms of like just the best players that could compete with any player from any region. We do get those in the West. We get them in China, but they're not in the West, but you know what I mean, outside of Korea. We get them in China. We even had one in Southeast Asia. We get them in Europe. We get them in North America. We do get these players, but to me, that's the big difference. The infrastructure aspect doesn't do a good job of building the other players who can't be a Faker level guy, but making them the best they can be, and then finding how they could complement in the right combination, the right constellation of players, the Faker type guy to make him have the maximum game impact. So in terms of these sorts of players, one of the crucial aspects they can do, and this is why I said it also depends which complementary players you put around. The general principle I'd say for how this works is that typically in the best teams ever, you tend to have a two-way system with the complementary player. First and foremost, his best strengths, the reason he's going to complement the Faker is that he will cover some aspect of the Faker's game, which either is like a natural weakness. So for example, if the Faker's a very aggressive player, you might need a player who can camp his lane all the time, or who can take care of him, or who can ready to back up and peel for him. In that sense, he might complement what would be a weakness of the Faker, but it's not really, it's just part and parcel of his strength. Or the other way around, this good player, the Faker guy, covers his weakness to a degree. And as a result, this player who's good, but he's not a superstar, because the way the Faker guy plays, or his role in the team, covers some of that guy's weakness. Now, this guy looks incredible. So an obvious example within Faker's own team for there would have been like Bengi. Bengi wasn't a god. That's what we've discovered after watching enough of Bengi play. But he was very good at the time. But part of that was having Faker there emphasized how great his play was. He only had to do certain things to contribute to Faker being amazing. And then Faker's play in terms of pressure, etc., also created a lot of opportunities for where Bengi could be. And then, yes, Bengi had a very good intuitive sense. Bengi had skills, but you didn't notice his weak points because of the Faker there. And then when Bengi dropped off a bit, you saw, wow, he's got all these weaknesses, all these flaws. And actually, if you traced it back, a lot of them were always there. So now to get away from the Faker, let's actually do this. To make my point, I'll pick out some of the greatest Korean teams of all time. And I'll tell you who like the Faker type guy was, or who the superstar best possible players were. And then we'll look at who the really awesome complementary players were that helped make those players really awesome even though when the complementary players fell away or were worse, these other players could be just as good, but the impact was just not there the same. So the first team we're going to go to is going to be the first truly great Korean team who can stand amongst the all-time greats. It's going to be Azubu Frost going into CJ into Frost, formerly Mig Frost. But Azubu Frost was when they became the great team. So the two players who stand out as the gods, the fakers in this team, the first one is obviously Mad Life. This transcendent, not to the same degree, Faker transcended the game. Mad Life transcended his role. He was just a support player, a ward bot, all these things that you thought of as a support player. But no, here was this incredible playmaking support with unreal mechanics, timing, understanding of cooldowns, knowing when to engage, ranges of abilities, just a really, really unreal level of player. And who was the other one? Shy. This player who, for a time, at the end of 2012, early 2013, I think he had a brief period where I think he was the best player in the world. Like, I actually think he was better than Macnoon. Even at the time when Macnoon became the OGN champion, in theory, he was the best top player and one of the best. Actually, I think Shy was the best. Shy was just amazing laning, amazing ability to freeze, farm whenever he wants, always does well in all these different matchups, has great pushing pressure, just turns up and doesn't need jungle support all the time, turns up in fights and just does godlike in terms of his actual raw team fighting on a team where they need damage because their mid lane is not very strong, their AD carry is not very strong. He's relied upon to do so much, and he was able to. He was just a god. So these two players, Mad Life and Shy. Now, who are the complementary players here who aren't godlike players, but who looked really good at the time and because of how they complement those players? So with Mad Life, it's Woong. Now, here's what's funny. People before Mad Life finished playing with Woong used to talk about Woong, in the West at least, as if he was like Spaces now. Like, oh, he's this trash AD carry who's holding Mad Life back, and if Mad Life just had some godlike AD carry, he'd bully the whole world. Now, it's probably true. If Mad Life did have a godlike AD carry, it would be like an unstoppable lane. It would be like Imp Matter above and beyond maybe even that level. Maybe that's true. But the other side of it's an exaggeration. Like, actually, the key thing about Woong was, first of all, he didn't play AD carry originally. He did want to play AD carry. He'd originally been a top laner. But crucially, he wasn't some mechanical god. He wasn't going to win lane all the time. But he knew that Mad Life was the great player, etc. But also, crucially, it actually turns out that Mad Life's a player who needed direction from his AD carry. So what was good about Woong was he didn't have the physical aspects to be great, but actually he had a very good sense of the game. He had a good understanding of the pick ban phase. So Frost always did very well in pick ban. They got lots of advantages. They got the right compositions here. They'd get something here where you'd think to yourself, like, oh, they're going to face problems early game, but they'd know that and they'd survive past the early game. They'd get to the team fight where they were always strong, and their synergy in terms of team fighting was always excellent, and knowing how to use, like, which champions will synergize with which in terms of CC, and which, have we got enough damage here? And is this going against AP or AD? Like, they were very good at this, and crucially, Woong was a big part of it. And you saw when Woong left, this was when the team just started to go downhill season by season, and they lost something special. Even though in theory they got some stronger AD carries. They got Hermes. They tried other people who in theory were better AD carries than Woong, but actually they couldn't have the same impact on the game. So Woong was there to synergize with Mad Life and the rest of the team in this sense and complement them. He wasn't a great player, but he complemented them. And crucially, Woong didn't have to do any special plays. Mad Life would make plays, bring kills to him, bring aspects to the lane where he could outplay the opponents, and this will allow Woong to just chill and not just get destroyed every laning phase and have no impact at all. These players could all do this stuff. By having a stable bot lane, now Shy didn't have to worry about just being camped 24/7 like he would in later days when, like you've seen the last sort of 2 or 3 seasons, that's Shy's life all day long. He's camped all day long. They shut him down super early. He can't do anything later on. And obviously the tank meta obviously came along. Now, who else helped Shy? Cloud Templar. Cloud Templar's style was this very intelligent ward information style, where his whole thing was about playing like the Amumu, like CC type jungler, and yeah, he would sometimes come to Shy's lane, but in general, Shy can play 1v1, Shy can play 1v2, but they set up kills, then Cloud Templar would come there. He'd be going around the map, getting information, setting everything up for trying to survive with this information to the late game to get the team fight, and that's when Shy could shine, when he could be incredible. If you let him, he'd always have strong laning. Sometimes he'd just bully people in, like you saw him do to Wicked in those latter games in the OGN final, but eventually, all you have to do is just let him get to the team fight with enough damage or enough armor, whatever it is, to be able to have the big impact, and he's going to do it. Now let's go through some other teams here. SK Telecom, obviously, let's just do that one then. Faker is obviously the god in this team, but if you want to look at the other star, who's the legitimate star, the other one's obviously Piglet. Now, back then, this is where the system works too well, where actually people wanted to say, no, and Impact's the best top lane, and Bengi's the best jungler, and you know what, Pumandu's the best spot. No, that's the key thing. Pumandu and Bengi are complementary players here. I've already described the Bengi one. I probably should have saved that to the spot. Whatever, I used it already. But Pumandu, here's the interesting one. He wasn't a god. There was a time when he looked really strong, but part of that is how he synergized with Piglet. What made him really, really good was that he almost had like a SOAS type quality. Maybe I shouldn't have used the SOAS one, because SOAS tends to pick the weird champions, but he doesn't practice so much. Okay, maybe like a SOAS / Zoro Zero type quality where he can play anything, but in Pumandu's case, it's more like his main focus was to have as wide a champion pool as anything, and crucially to play everything that's in any way OP or powerful at the time, even if the other people haven't picked up on it, even if it's difficult to play like Nami, whatever it might be, he just play everything that you need, so that as a result, it's like you have this huge wide palette, and then Piglet's like the painter, and it's like, well, which colors do you want to use? Oh, you want to use this one? Well, I've got this complementary shade for you, and I've got all these different shades you can choose from here, and I've mixed this one up for you already here, and it's not like Piglet was ever limited, like, oh, I want to play this, like, you don't play that, do you? So I guess I'll have to, I'll just have to revert back to a Caitlyn here or something. No, he had every choice in the world. And so you saw when Pumandu fell off and he couldn't do this anymore, Piglet was still good. Admittedly, Piglet had some little slumps himself. Piglet was still good, but suddenly his level looked way worse. Significantly, not like the Faker one where he's still a god. That's why I say he really does transcend it. Even complementary players falling off didn't hurt Faker that much. But Piglet really dropped off a cliff. Even though I think he was still a very good player, he was still a star player level guy. But you saw his complementary player leaving is what killed him. But when that complementary player was there, now he was at his strongest. That's not some coincidence. Then the other two teams I'm going to pick out from Korean LoL history, obviously the two Samsung teams. So let's go with Blue first. In Blue, the Faker type best player possible, it's obviously Dade and Deft. Now let's go with Dade first. Dade's main strength is that he's the guy where if you let him get those 2 or 3 champions, and you can't block them all out, he's going to get 1 or 2 during a series, and you let him get to a team fight, his playmaking ability is unreal. It's off the charts. Like the things he can do and the damage he can wreak, and just the sheer level of attention he's going to draw in a team fight is going to be incredible. Now the other star, Deft, incredible reactive skills, incredible damage output. Combining these two together, yeah, you look at the stars and you go like, wow, yeah, when you put the two together, that's what made them go off. And it was, to a degree, their performances. But what allowed them to do that was these two complementary players they had, Acorn and Spirit. Now, Acorn, I know people have billed it as though he was just the best top player now and he's even great 1v1. Yeah, it's true, he had a very good sense of certain matchups in the spring. But you saw after the spring, he immediately dropped down a little level. But he had those few champions he was great, and we obviously all think of him on like Maokai, that sort of a champion. He was great at zoning. And if you zone in a teamfight properly, like Acorn would, and you get to the teamfight without being heavily behind, so you've got your items, if you can zone properly, Dade is going to just wreak complete havoc, and then Deft is going to clean everyone up. They're not even going to be mainly focusing Deft because of Dade, and therefore Deft's going to get everyone. So this complementary player is going to activate those 2 stars, the 2 fakers, to be even better, to be as good as they possibly can be. Then throw in Spirit, and the key thing with Spirit was he actually had a bit of a Bengi in him, because you saw when Blue dropped off a bit, partly was like his impact didn't seem to be the same, but it wasn't like, okay, now his mechanics are shit, and now he can't play any champions, because, like Kha'Zix was still there, these champions he plays. It was more like, his was more... The reason I tie him into a Bengi is because I felt like when Bengi was at his peak, it wasn't that he was some genius of knowing where to go. It's that he had a good intuitive sense for it. And this intuitive sense, the problem with intuition in that sense is that, I shouldn't use the word sense there because I've already used it, but if it fails at all or it starts to go the wrong way, you read the game the wrong way, it was never based on some like calculation or some flowchart of like if X then do Y or Z, and so as a result when it goes wrong it's like, well, I just knew what to do, well now I just don't know what to do, so it's very hard to get that back. And so to me there was a bit of that to his game, and also a lot of his other lanes were stronger in as much as Acorn was much stronger in the period before Spirit became a bit less effective, and then Dade wasn't as good at Worlds, so he looked a bit worse as a player. Deft wasn't quite as good either, so his lanes dropping off also hurt him a bit, so his complementary action, his fell off a bit, and then he couldn't complement his stars as well. It was kind of a dual thing there, it was kind of mixed together. The last Western team I'll pick out is obviously Samsung White, the world champions. In this team, now here's the really interesting one, because everyone knows I think Imp is very good, I think he's criminally underrated, people write him off way too much, but the two geniuses in this team, realistically, it's Mata and Dandy. Mata, at this point, probably the best support player ever. It probably has to be said. And Dandy, probably the best jungler, if not top 2 jungler of all time. So what's weird about these two is, yeah, we had Madlife be a supportive role, but a star. But in this one, both of your supportive roles are the superstars. So now what's interesting is the complementary players now are actually going to be traditional carry roles. So first of all, We have a traditional carry role that got bastardized into like a hybrid support role, which is hybrid support carry role, which is the top lane. And in this particular world of that hybrid world, that's where Lupa's the best, isn't he? He's great at the teleport, Mundo type zoning, just soak up damage tank player, but also he has a good enough champion pool to occasionally play those carries when it's in a game where he's going to be able to do that. And crucially, because of the rest of this team he doesn't have as much pressure. And because he has the two best support players, and the two best support players in terms of vision, he always has insane vision, and people are going to his other lanes because that's where the carries are. So he has the least pressure. So his game is so wide open that then when he's able to be very effective in that area, it causes even more problems. It's one of those scenarios in basketball where we say, like, pick your poison. So for example, if I have a great center inside who's dominating inside, well, then you're going to collapse on him constantly, try and get the ball out of his hand. But then if he has great shooters that he can throw it out to, now you've got a choice. Do you go for the guy inside who's really dominant? Do you let them just take open shots? Now it's like, the reason it's pick your poison is because one of them's going to kill you. You just get to choose which it is. So in this case, that's what Lupo was able to do. People in general would just leave him and let him get his game and let him go off, because they still thought to themselves, it's better than letting that bot lane get rolling. It's better than letting pawn like dumpster or mid lane. We've got to do that. So we'll just have to go for Dandy and shut him down early. So we'll just have to let Lupo be the guy who goes off. So him doing that made their games even more effective. And then obviously Pawn. Now Pawn, some people naively probably think, wait a minute, he should be the Faker. Like, no, ignore what happened with him and Faker. In general, the thing about Pawn was he initially started off as like a one-trick pony type player. He just played one or two champions exceptionally well. His key thing in the end was to make his champion really wide. And not to be godlike on all of them and they have to ban that, just to be good enough on a bunch of them that he's always a threat to, sometimes you have to take that out if it's a really strong champion in the meta pool, that's one that he plays, or he can just play a bunch of different things. And yes, sometimes he'll get kills in lane, sometimes he'll just be okay in lane. That's not as big a deal. All he has to do is survive, play well, provide a little bit of pressure, a little bit of damage to the enemy. It doesn't matter in general because he's got this godlike bot lane and he's got this amazing jungle and this amazing support player providing all the vision, and it's going to get to the mid game, whereas a team Samsung White's going to tear you apart. But the key thing is, when he's just playing his role, just like Lupa is there, well, they've already got the strongest bot lane, so who are you going to shut down? Which lane are you going to shut down? Which lane are you going to stop from winning? If you can stop one lane, the other two lanes can get rolling. Bot lane definitely can get rolling the whole time. And now you can't camp the bot lane because there's a decent, strong mid laner, decent top laner. Where are you going to go? So you can see how the complementary players play into either they cover a weakness, potential weakness of the star, or the star covers a weakness of theirs and opens their game up. That's what's beautiful about these teams. These star players could all have been in different teams, and at times have, like we've seen with Mad Life and Shy, where actually after Wound left, they were still really good for like a season or two, but their team just went to shit and they could never make another final. They were never going to make a final at that point. Now, in terms of Western teams, it's true. The problem with the Western teams is we get these really good players, but a lot of the time we don't make the most of their careers because we don't put the right complementary players around them. So this is going to sound weird, but I think the perfect example right off the bat with this, and in general with these players, by the way, I'm going to try not to pick players who, like for example, I think Zoro Zero could have been a great player, but he didn't get to prove it enough. He didn't show it enough that I don't think it's worth even bringing the argument up here. So I'll just go with players that are proven and that it's pretty certain they could have done more if they'd had the right players with them. So the first name is Froggen, because actually when you go back to season 2, it looks like he had the ideal team around him because they had that style and they went to the late game and they got all those finals and did great. But actually he only won 2 tournaments and one of them was Lone Star Clash. So take that out of it. He only won 1 tournament ever, and yet he might be the best Western player ever. And he's attended many tournaments and played in top 3, top 4 teams all the time, getting to semis all the time, making a bunch of finals, but he's only won 1 tournament ever. That tells you didn't maximize what you could have done with that sort of player, despite the fact that at one point in time he was better than all the Eastern mid laners, and all they could win was 1 tournament. Now, in terms of the great Western mid laners, okay, let's go Froggen, Alexic, Xpeke. Over history, in terms of greatness, Froggen was the better player of the 3. Yeah, of those 3, who's won the most? Froggen's won 1 tournament, 2 if you count the Lone Star Clash small tournament. Alexic has won countless tournaments, 5 or more. Xpeke, again, we're getting to the same sort of level, like 4, 5, and many finals. These players, Froggen was the better player, but they had the complementary players. You think of the greatest teams ever, and actually, moving CLGU out of the way, you'd go with Gambit, the M5 team. They were a great example of like the complementary players covering the weaknesses, and then the good players covering like a Darian's stupid weakness that would have destroyed another team, or a Genji's weakness that would have caused problems for certain other teams. These weren't issues because of how they fit together. And obviously the Fnatic teams, think of the 2013 Fnatic teams. These teams, part of what made their style so wonderful is that a guy like Cyanide never did look exposed in general, because of the fact that his solo laners were monsters and they wanted a supportive jungler, and that's just the way they worked, and it was more about just like helping to create picks with vision. This is exactly that, unlocking someone up so that your solo laner can get the kill and get rolling. These teams, the Fanatics, the Gambits, the Muscovite, these had lots of talent, and they had the right complementary talents around the player. To go from Froggen, let's go to Doublelift. I already did my video about him, but yeah, Doublelift, if you'd given him a beastly support player, if you'd given him just another really strong laner in another lane, top lane or mid lane, would have a lot less pressure on him. You couldn't just focus on camping him 24/7, shutting him down. There would be more focus in the team fights. You wouldn't even need to directly just peel for him. You'd be another player to concentrate on. Like if he had a Dart Egg wreaking havoc, he does have the peel, but you didn't have that when you get a greater jungler, a greater support player. You could see how he could have gone from the 0 lands to winning some lands, or to being a much better player, even though his skill wouldn't have to change. His play wouldn't have to change. Another one, and this might sound weird, is Special. Special has all the tools. He's done everything in his career you'd need from this sort of a great player, to where he could have been like the Western Matter or whatever. He wouldn't be a Matter, obviously, in the same way I described that no one's going to be the faker. But he could have been a Western Matter in terms of like the best possible support player. And what's weird is you're going to think to yourself, well, he's won lots of tournaments. Yeah, he has. Special's won lots of tournaments only in NA and against some EU competition, and like once a Chinese team and a Singapore team came, but he didn't have to play them. That's about it. The difference is when you have a player of that caliber, could have been the absolute best at his position in the West, you should be able to win some international tournaments. You should at least be contesting them, coming like finals, semi-finals all the time, competing. You should at least be in a Gambit type situation where you can sometimes beat the Koreans. He never got to have that. And part of the reason why is because in the early days he was with Chaos, who... he was a good player for him, but internationally, maybe this wasn't the right complementary player for what, because we've seen later on with Wild Turtle, Special could be doing a lot of playmaking, could be dominating the lane. So maybe he should have been with a Doublelift type player. Yeah, actually, I probably shouldn't have picked that because that's another star player, so it doesn't sound complimentary. There's other players he could have been with. Like, put it this way, let's go back in time. If you'd have put him with a Sneaky, what Sneaky is now, if he could have been with Special a year and a half ago, then you would have seen a very dominant Special laning phase. Now then, obviously Special later had Cop. He's never going to win the World Championship with Cop, is he? So I think I've made the point here, okay? Or at least I've given my perspective on how I see the game and how the complementary players fit with them. And to me, the benefits of infrastructure is that it's not that they take the god or a good player and make him a god. The gods are there already. The gods will come up. The cream rises to the top. The real problem there is what do you do with the mass of other players? In the West, we've just got this mass of players and we just plug one in, try one. Sometimes we try him for like 3 years even though it's not really working. Or we just plug another one in and he seems hot now, so we'll try him for this season. But there's not a rationale behind that, how the team is made, or there's not a logic behind what purpose is he going to serve, and does he know the purpose in his own role? Whereas I think that's what the Korean infrastructure helps bring out. And by the way, it's not perfect. It doesn't do it every time. But in the best cases, the ones that are the world all-time world beater type teams, you can see where this worked.